We'll try it again. So, oh, then you guys are going to learn future patterns. Kagachtu, yagachtu. Kagachtu aq. We're going to try it. Yagachtu laq. We're going to succeed or defeat a single person. Okay, so the Zoom crashed. I get to maybe splice two videos together. I might just put it up in two recordings just to save myself some hassle. We'll see. Okay, so the idea here is you're going to listen to it twice. You're not going to see any text on there. Then one of you will read it when we show the text and do your best to sound like, Robert Zuboff. It's a lofty goal. Like, that's a master storyteller. Who wouldn't want to sound like Robert Zuboff? Then we'll pull it apart and take a look at it. So let me make sure I shared my audio. I'm all scrambled. Okay, here we go. Stay with us, Zoom. Who's going to read it?
I can do that.
Huh.
Awe, we ach yagu yicht guide you to sagun. A yicht awe ach at nacha kucht askewu.
Sheesh. Łukaháa. So, pulling this apart, right? And I'll have to check. I got like a different color scheme with this because now I have to figure out something. Let me tell you what I'm trying to do. I do believe the color scheme of the verb matches what I just showed you. Outside of the verb, I'm using green for these direction and locational things that we just learned about, right? So we is over there. Yik is in a shallow container. T is to be at, and usually recently arriving or sometimes touching. So when you look at this, the idea here is to have the top text, which is not pulled apart yet, but we start to introduce the colors. Underneath that, you have a pulled apart version. This is what we call segmenting. So this is saying awe is made up of a and we. Those are the two parts. Tlingit, like a lot of Native American languages, is a bunch of little parts that smush together. It's very common. Like Hawaiian doesn't work like that. When I was learning Hawaiian, I would consult with a speaker of Mohawk because I'd be like, okay, how's this work in your language? Because I need to know how to think about it. And we would help each other because conceptually the languages work very differently. Now that Mohawk and Tlingit are the same, they are a lot more similar than they are to Hawaiian. So then here, that's where we're pulling them apart, including like yagu is yak plus u. So when you pull them apart, you also sometimes revert it back to the phase that it was. Underneath that, underneath the segmented part, you have what we call the gloss. The gloss says, here's what these individual pieces mean. But here, and let's talk about this for a second. Because just like with translation, where you can go word for word, right? So you could translate this as, that is, that my boat, in shallow container at, guide, and then you've got you do sagen, people used to call it, right? So that would be sort of a line-by-line translation. But you might have to sort of massage that into English so that it sounds okay and it makes sense. But it depends on who you're translating for. If you're translating for a whole bunch of Tlingit language learners, you might be doing it differently than if you're trying to say, I want people to consider this elevated literature. So then I'll write fancy English and not worry about the word order, right? So similar to that, when you gloss something, this is not a super literal gloss. Like if we say aweh, I'll say, well, those two things combine to say that is. Like, so a literal sort of, more sort of defined gloss would probably say, focus that, my, canoe, relational or possessed. And so in, shallow, container, right? And then at, and you get guide, it used to be called. Okay, so here's the things that we're sort of looking for. Is I used a kind of a gold color. It's all random. I have no system. For relational pronouns, I use green for any of those direction and location things, because we sort of looked at generally how those worked. And now we're going to see how they work in the language and which ones are very common, right? So here you say, oh, this, if we haven't covered this already, this is your new So if you're speaking Tlingit, you don't want to stand up and say, Ganachish, Koneya Aksai, Yakeya Yoksatini, right? Because it doesn't sound like you're speaking Tlingit. If you change your ums to awe, you'll sound just fine. Awe, Koneya Aksai, Awe, Yakeya Yoksatini Yak. Or you could throw in a little variation. Yakeya Hati Adi Yak, Wushkanach Art. Ja, Tlingit, Stikatut. Then I went right back to right? So when we look at this and we start to see also, here's how you pull apart the verb. So this verb is, this part means kind of to and fro, but it mostly has a grammatic function here. And usually it says there'll be a U on the front and a K on the end to say it regularly happens. For example, Yu kaya tunk. They are speaking. The noun form of that is yu chatunk. We usually hear the possessed form yu chatungi. Tlingit yu chatungi. Hashishko has yu chatungi. Ha yu chatungi. So that's what the U and the K are doing on there. There's invisibles in here, which includes a third person object, which in this case is it. Could also be them, but in this case it's it. De, the subject, people. Zero, the classifier. Sa, to name something or to call its name out. The KW is linked to this, which means it happens regularly. Then the un says it doesn't happen anymore. Put those together, it used to be called. Any questions? To finish, so it was a long sentence, right? Ayiktawe at nachakuch asqewu. So here we get ayikt again, and let me tell you about ayikt. That's how you sit in a boat, that's how you sit in a car. Right? That's all that is doing here. You yik into a boat, and because you yik into a boat, you yik into a car. Doesn't matter if you close the door, it's a closed container, not. No, you yik because it's like a canoe. Your car is a canoe. It's just how it works.
Like an airplane then too?
I think you would cut in an airplane because of whoosh cut countly yiji at.
I thought an airplane is
Well, sometimes it's like flying canoe. Okay, let's yik into the
a
plane.
canoe? I don't know.
Yeah, yanda kanyak is sometimes what it's called.
I don't know.
Okay, yeah, so let's do it. Let's yik into that. And then the sky is a river. So a yikt away, so here we got again, in it. So we see like this yikt is important. Away really like separates different thoughts, right? It's a really neat thing to say like, let me just throw an away in here so that you can hear that we're talking about something else right after it. You have a plus t. This means just around a place. So for example, if I said, Atchagut, I was walking around. Just walking around, just went for a walk, right? So here you have at, na, kha, kuch. So we might have heard this verb as wukuch, yanakuch, for a car or a boat to be going somewhere. Nachakuch has two main ways to interpret it, and you get it from context. It means either I always do. So you could say, like, if you like to get in your car and just go for drives, I always go driving. That's what this CH does. It's a habit habitual is what's called, right? So I'm always driving. In this case, like, I'm always driving around, I'm cruising. And in a boat, yeah, I go all over the place in my boat. The other thing, and this is kind of interesting because you could say, like, let me just copy this and put it up here. So you could say, that would probably actually be a you. So would be, I used to always go around, but I don't anymore. My war pony broke down, had to sell my boat, whatever the thing is. But what's really interesting is you could have a verb, and it means I used to. It's just sort of, it's an interesting verb the way that it works, but technically it does mean happens all the time, all the time. And here we have na, kha is me, kuch is the root, and then ch is the suffix. I think I have a different color for the suffix now, so we'll fix it in post. Asqaywu. This is a verb for seining. Okay. Next one. Are you okay?
Awe yekhatte wasak singetrenach shatan. Awe yekhatte wasak singetrenach shatan.
Can we get the chat? Oh, I just saw the question in the chat. So let me back up for a second. So if you want to say we always cruise around, what has to change? Does anybody remember from what we just did a little while ago?
Not too cooked.
Yep, so we go from cha to tu. Atna to kuch. We're always cruising. The big hoopty, right? And like this, it will start to become more and more clear. Because the idea here is to like use these colors to say, red's the subject, tu is we, cha is I, is you, y is you all. Third person is always unmarked. There's never anything there. And then du is the fourth person. That's all of them. That's all of the subjects. You could learn how to start changing them. Okay. Can I get a reader?
Awe yechat duasak. Shinke nach shadach.
Okay, sheesh. Anybody want to try and translate that before we look at it?
That is.
I'm called in Shinke shadach.
So as far as like to pull the thing apart, here's awe. Like it's just such a common thing. Like I sometimes don't even translate it. It kind of depends, right? So here we see it's translated as well. Well, you know. Here's an example of when you say yechat duasak and when you say yuchat duasak. And can anybody tell us what the rule is?
When the name immediately follows or not.
Well, if the
Like
name is
subverted.
immediately before the verb, yes, then it would be you. If it's not immediate, if it's anywhere else, if that name is anywhere else, it'll be ye. And we see it at the end of the sentence. So he could also say aweh shadang yuchat du asaq shengit chinach. But he wanted to say aweh yechat du asaq shengit chinach shadang. So here we have yay, which this I would change this now. Someday there's so many colors to work on. So now I got to change this to my preverb color, which was a different shade of green. Dang it. I'll have to figure it out. I don't know. Somebody come paint these verbs for me. Thus, me as an object, do, fourth person, people do it, or it happens. Now the classifier has switched to the plus I form because it's happened. When we go back to dusagen, not called that anymore. So when he says guide, you dusagen, achyagu, if I heard that, I'd be like, oh, his boat's a goner. Because nobody calls it guide anymore. So that's why it was 0 before. But now it's w because it has happened. Duwasak means people call it that. Shengit, enach. Che is a mouth. Nach is through. Shadak. His name contains directional and locational things. Da is around the mountain. Is to reside. This name comes from one of the oldest Tlingit villages in memory. It's called Shadak. When we lived in the interior around a mountain. It's a Ḳokwédi and a Deshitan name. Ask questions if you got them. We'll keep going.
Awa ya aksayin nakawe. Awa khatu khukit wen. Chago aye. Chago. Awa ya aksayin nakawe. Awa khatu khukit wen. Chago aye. Chago.
It fades off a little bit at the end, so you'll read this one fully. Who wants to read? It's a good time to do it.
Oe yach se yenach oe chat wuchuch gitwen chago ai chak una.
Sheesh. Geet Wayne is a name. I'll give you that. Anything else you folks recognize? Make bold predictions.
Sai is name, so Sai
Yes.
would be through the name.
Yes, in this
My
case,
name.
through my name. Exactly. So you see that nach, see how it can just pop onto a noun? I'll give you wuchuch if nobody knows it. To summon. Now what else? Chagu ai.
Through my name, I summon Gitwain.
Well, but you got chat wuchuch. If I summoned it, I would expect chwachuch. So what happens if we have chat? When you said yuchat du wasak, I am, people call me, so I was summoned me,
Oh.
right? So
Git-
this is like we just, and we're still gonna know those, right? So chat is always gonna be me. Like this verb is happening to me. Yechatbune, it happened to me. Right? So Geet Wayne summoned me through my name. Chagu ai, chagwuna. Chagu ai would be the one of long ago. Wuna would be they died. So let's see the parts, right? Aweh, ya. So and we see like how this works. Like ya, sa yi nach aweh. Through my name, aweh chat wu chuch. Geet Wayne. Getting down to the verb, right? Chat, me. Yuh, perfective marker. what that marker does, it's not really a time thing, but it says, let's talk about this verb in terms of whether or not it happened. You got two options once you throw that perfective marker in there, usually. And if there's no clash, then that means it happened. That means you will have a plus I classifier. In this case, ya. You plus ya is woo. Woo ke, woo chuch. And then we have gitwain. Chagu ayi. The one of long ago. Chak wu na. They died long time ago. There's a third person object there. Again, you plus ya, woo. If you had like there might be other cases where that's going to change, but like in this case, if there's only two things there, because the zero doesn't count as a thing. Okay, one more.
Yi sa tak hot shit. Yi sa tak hot shit.
Oh, it's so short. We'll probably do two more. Who wants it? You got a short one. You better jump in there and grab it. Okay. Any predictions on what we might be looking at?
This is new.
Yes. What about yadak? Yadak is a male human post-puberty, pre-fully grown. Right, so not really, so adolescent would be, so again, we got tokanei, baby. Can't really move around yet. Once they start moving around, now they could be a yadekwetsku or shatkietsku. They stay that way until they hit puberty, then they become yaduk, shatk. That means they're old enough, they could probably make a baby. And then you get to yiskha, yishawat, ka, shawat, ka, shan, shawat, shan. So once you put yis in front of it, yis yaduk, that means they have recently become like a teenager. I don't know what you call it, right? And so in this case, and then you've got the chatzati, which would be what? Yes, to be one of those. I am one of those. Whatever has this underline X. I am a young man. That's what it says. There are, when you look at how Tlingit works in storytelling too, they start, like this is what we call an imperfective verb. It's talking about something that's usually right now. And he's an old guy when he's telling the story, right? But he's sort of throwing us back into this time frame. This is what Tlingit does. It does this kind of stuff all the time. It moves a lot in terms of how it deals with time and being and stuff like that. So you do have yis yidak chatzati. So this suffix marks like what the group is, right? So for example, I could say Ḥukach adich chatzati. I am Ḥukach adi. Ḳu'atletu wuch chatzati. I'm a teacher. Shqash yesh chatzati. I'm a lying man, lying all the time. And so that's how that works. So you got chat, it's blue, there's that object, right? Se, that's the classifier. It's plus I, which means it happened. T, the verb root to be. Okay, so again, this glossing is not an item by item thing. It's just sort of saying, oh yeah, these things together means I am one of these. Okay. We might be at, how long is the next one? Okay, last one.
Ketuyi satak otsatita sinaya kochiye wote. Ketuyi satak otsatita sinaya kochiye wote.
Who wants to read it?
I'll try. Play uyis yada khatsati yada ina yak akchiyewuti.
Sheesh. And what do we recognize? Translators?
But when I was a young man,
Yeah, so this, what is this dach? We learned this, right? From, right? So what do you think happens when you throw it on a verb?
That coming from the place by that verb's verbing.
Well, we use the same suffixes to mark time as we do location. It's like time and space are they're marked the same way. So with that in mind, yis yidach chatsati yidach. From the time I was a young man. Right? So this could also be translated as since that time when I was a young man. So you can throw day on it and say up until that time. So you could also say until the time I was a young man, then something else happened that probably stopped happening when you became a young man. But now that you're using from, he's saying ever since I was a young man, tsina yak achjiyebuti. Anybody know tsina yak?
Now is light.
Yep.
Boat.
You get kind of unexpected result when you put them together. If you got a light in a boat, you got a motorboat. That's how it works.
Jiné,
Ah,
can we just for a second? In my head, there's a difference between when I was and from the time that I was.
right.
So it's like from the time that I was, which is a point in time, and then it comes forward versus
Yes,
back when I was in this single point in time.
exactly. So he could
Okay.
have said, Clay chu yis yedach chat wus ti at the time I was a young man, right? So what he's saying is like, when I was a young man, and then this is saying I had a boat, right? Achji yewuti, it was in my possession. But if he
And
says,
this is okay.
now that he's saying dach, what I would interpret that as like, ever since I came of age, I've always had a boat, right? And so like, Tlingit does all these subtle things with like little tiny parts. And so this is that same verb, siti, right? So this is the other part. It's like you go from siti to satiyidach. And what has happened is it has turned into a noun. And so you can turn a verb into a noun. Like you could say, an example, I'll just grab this. So you could say, and this is what we'll end with, Tlingit ha-sati. What is that? We are Shingit. We are human beings, or we are Tlingit. It depends on the context. But then if you could change that to ha Shingit Satiyi, our Shingit identity. So now it has become a noun. And this noun follows all those same rules that we have learned. This is what it looks like on its own. Sati. You usually don't see it like that. But then if you say, oh, well, that has to be possessed because it's ours. So the rules of possession is that ends with a vowel, so I got to throw YI on there. But if that's a short high ending, it's got to go long, and now this is going to push this high. Follows all these rules we've learned. All these things we've learned, we see in action from us. And this is what always blows me away. Like a speaker will just talk. I'm like, you just know how to do those 500 things I've got to think about every single time I open my mouth. But the more you do it, like, and this is the key, like as we start moving towards break, you have to keep doing this stuff. You can't take a break from it. Sorry. I mean, get some rest, but don't forget about it. Find ways to engage. And if this stuff starts getting you confused, stop thinking about it and just listen to it. But you'll hear these speakers doing all this stuff that we're learning about, and they just do it just like that. And you will too. The time is coming. Gaudeya kandakit. Konachaway singit enach yuchasakich yi guch sa ti. But now you gotta go home. Cheesh. We'll see you on Thursday. We'll see what happens. I'll probably be. I might be really punchy. I don't know. It'll be fun.
Take
Cheesh.
care of yourself.
Well,
Whatever you need to do, take care of yourself.
yeah. Wasa duwasak safe travels.
Kadain at kunatin. All right. That's carefully. There's that ut to be going around. Kunatin.
Attention.
Ekwati.
See you, custom.
Cheesh you, huh?
Ganalchish.
Sheesh.
Good night.